On today's episode, I sit down with Tyler Wallis. He's the second of a whole team of ex-Amazonians that I'm fortunate enough to sit down with. Tyler spent 7 years at Amazon, has recently started The Lab, a consultancy focused on helping brands grow on Amazon. And we really dive deep into what it was like working at Amazon, building out teams, scaling, everything that relates to the marketplace and beyond. And highly interesting session. I hope you get the value out of it that I did. Hi, and welcome to Successful Scales, the show where I interview now successful professionals about their journey and try and garner insights onto any tips that can be applied to your business at home. Whether it's financial freedom or the exit of your company, wherever your journey may take you, the idea here is to simply learn from those who have done it before. I hope you enjoy and you get some value out of this. Buckle up and enjoy the episode. Tyler, welcome to Successful Scales, mate. I am so excited to be sitting here chatting with you today.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Yanni.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was just saying to you before, you've got a fanboy in Lippy, my co-founder, massively, and he got me onto your podcast. So before we even jump into all about you and why we're going to have such a thrilling conversation, I got to call it out myself. Your podcast, Think Like Amazon, is brilliant. Anyone who is listening to me week in, week out, I thank you and I apologize. I joke, but if you want to get some serious insights into, what real scale, what it is to work at a company like Amazon and how, some of these minds that are really shaping the future of e-commerce are wired and how to build in leadership principles. And I mean, I could go on about promoting the podcast for days, but I just say it is a worthwhile listen. And just fortunate to have you here to take some of that wisdom and give it to all the listeners here today.
Thanks, Yanni. That's very kind of you. And, I'll say it goes both ways. There's so much wisdom that you're sharing through the guests you have on this show. So I'm also a fanboy here of Successful Scales and look forward to continuing to hear the nuggets of wisdom that you bring onto the show.
Well, on that note, let's do the typical. I'd love for those who don't know you, and obviously we've had some great conversations, and we're going to have another one here today. But tell us a little bit about your history, so everyone can get on the same page and be as excited as I am.
Yeah, Yanni, I feel like I have been on the corporate track for the last several years of my life. As you mentioned, I've been at Amazon for much of that, but I've really been an entrepreneur at heart for a long time. And so it's fun, and I'll get to kind of what I'm currently doing now, but to back up, growing up, I used to set up neighborhood car washes and lawn care businesses and hire all my friends in the neighborhood. And I really enjoyed kind of the opportunity to add value that was beyond just my own time, beyond kind of the hours in the day that I had myself. And so fast forward, went to college. I landed in a role working for an online grocery delivery company. So this is kind of like you think Instacart or Amazon Fresh before either of those were around. And it was a bit of a hard sale telling people, pay a little bit more and get your groceries delivered, but it was such a value add. And so I came onto that company when it was at a high growth stage, expanding to additional states and regions of the country. And effectively was charged to stand up a team and go sell this service. And so I had a lot of fun doing that. Feel like that was kind of the early days of my more formal entrepreneurial training. But I didn't have any sort of business background or business training. And so after a few years, went to business school. And I think that it was one of those like corporate presentations. Amazon came to town and they were talking about the growth they were having. This was, when they were just getting into the devices. So they talked about the new Kindle tablets that they had, and they kind of hinted at Fire TV that was going to be coming out soon. So it was an exciting time. And I remember just chatting with some of the Amazon folks and sharing some of the ideas, and one of them had spent some time on Amazon Fresh, that was a young business, and I was kind of picking their brains in terms of like, from my experience in this online grocery company, how are they thinking about this? And I think that, we hit it off, and that is what led to me coming to Amazon. So I spent about 7 years at Amazon, first as an intern during business school, and launched Amazon's grocery business in Canada. So I think rightfully so, they were leveraging a little bit of my past background. And then came full time after school and had a few different roles. So I first led the PC and IT category cross marketplace sellers in the US. Really enjoyed doing that. Had an opportunity to kind of scale my time across hundreds of thousands of sellers on the platform, which required a different mindset, versus a one-on-one kind of sales or biz dev interaction that I had been used to before. And then after that, I, was curious about this 1P retail side of the business. And so I moved over and went to our home improvement and smart home team, managed a P&L and a business there, and kind of grew in that role to eventually lead a team of vendor managers or buyers. And one of the things I realized during my time at Amazon is I was having so much fun, but where I was having the most fun was building these nascent businesses and scaling kind of young businesses within Amazon. So Amazon's, books and media and electronics and some of these categories had now been around for close to 20 years, but Amazon's always launching new business segments and getting into new spaces where they can disrupt and grow. And so that, one thing to another led to another. And I found myself talking to some of these more nascent teams and realizing I still really enjoy the e-commerce side of Amazon. And I was attracted to a role on the Amazon Canada team. So Canada is a much younger marketplace, especially at that time, than the US. And I ended up joining that role, where I spent my last few years at Amazon, and had the opportunity to lead the marketing team for Amazon Retail and a few other programs that happy to get into, where I got more of that building and scaling experience. And probably the most fulfilling was my last role, where I led Amazon's marketplace business for Canada, really working again with global sellers, both in Canada and abroad, selling into Canada and figuring out how we can scale that business and the FBA business to delight more customers. That brings me up to just about 3 months ago, Yanni, where I was reconnecting with a former Amazon colleague, and we were talking about kind of this entrepreneurial passion we had. We wanted to build something. We were enjoying Amazon, but I think had become a little bit disillusioned with some of the scale and bureaucracy and size that any big corporation gets to. I think detracts a little bit from some of that entrepreneurial builder startup feel. And so we decided to get back to working more closely with sellers and brands. And we founded The Lab, which is the consultancy we co-run today, where we help brands grow and succeed on Amazon.
Wow. Tough act to follow here. I'm sitting here just listening, taking notes, thinking, oh my God, what things you have seen, and just the evolution of the time. And thanks for sharing. If you guys weren't excited before, surely you are now. Also so fresh. I remember we spoke a few weeks ago, and it was relatively new, but yeah, 3 months. I mean, big shift. How you finding sort of stepping away from the corporate world, even though Amazon, I feel, is different when you look at, there's corporates and then there's corporates, and Amazon feels very, very different to the standard. But how are you finding stepping back into the very much entrepreneurial world?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's been something I've been reflecting on a lot over the last several weeks. I think that on the one hand, Amazon was such a great training ground for being a founder and working in a startup, even though it is a really big company. And the reason why is, Amazon, for one, really believes in this concept of single-threaded leaders. And so even though Amazon's a big place, and some of the organizations I worked in were thousands or tens of thousands of individuals, I had sole ownership and decision-making ability for what my specific team was working on and running. And you heard in my background, I changed teams 2 or 3 different times. And so it kind of got me used to having to be a little bit of I almost want to say chameleon, but like having to reinvent myself going into each of those different business categories or industries or geographies and getting up to speed really quickly. And I think that's been helpful in now starting off, because there are a lot of things that are new for me and for us, in a consulting space and really just starting a business, right? Like, as everything from incorporating to, tax and marketing and, website and everything that you have to do in a business can be really new the first time you go through it. And so it's been fun kind of taking that playbook of, jumping into new businesses, figuring out, okay, what are the top priorities, and then making kind of a go-to list of here's what we need to accomplish, working backwards from what we want the business to be in a year, 2 years, to, okay, what does that mean we need to accomplish in the next 6 months, 3 months, 1 month? So that has been great. I would say, the other thing that has been a little bit of a transition is really just wearing more hats. I felt like I wore a lot of hats in my roles at Amazon. As an entrepreneur, you wear a lot more hats, at least in the early days. And right now it's just a few of us. And so we don't have a whole bunch of folks that we have the freedom to delegate to like we did in our past Amazon roles. And so it's been fun. I think that's accelerated the learning opportunity every day. I'm like, okay, I need to go learn how to like update a website, or I need to learn how to put this pitch together to a potential client. And so it's been really fun kind of wearing all of those hats. I'm sure that I'm also looking forward to as your company helps with scaling some of those practices, so it's not always juggling, but enjoying the ride for now.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's so exciting to get to wear all those different hats and to sort of figure out the problem solving, which is at the core of being an entrepreneur, in my opinion, is how do I look at this big problem? How do we identify it, and then how do we solve it? And I think at some point it does get a little tiring to try and wear too many hats. So there's definitely like a time frame or a window where you have to start to think about scale. But yeah, I mean, the early stages are so fresh and new and exciting. And I can see why you'd be drawn to it now, like I am. And also just the notion of moving from different department to different department, sort of starting and focusing on these nascent verticals or different aspects of the business would continue to sort of re-energize you. You had a few points there that I'm obviously now privy to, having listened to, I think, all of the episodes that you released to date, but so much that I've learned just from listening to the podcast and from, how things have been done inside of Amazon. But you use the term single-threaded leadership. And I know that that's something that Lippy, who I mentioned earlier, I mean, he has literally been, making so much noise about that in the business, about having single-threaded leadership. So I'd love you to sort of maybe elaborate a little bit on that, because I think if people can get into the mindset of, what it takes to bring on the right person, to give them that level of leadership and ownership, how that has impact. So, I mean, I will butcher it, so I'm not going to attempt to recite what I've heard you speak about.
Yeah, and I think to really lay the context, this principle at Amazon is often referred to as separable single-threaded leadership, or separable single-threaded teams. And I think that the term separable and single-threaded are both super key in the definition. And the idea first comes back and has its roots in Amazon's priority and leadership principle around ownership. And, Jeff Bezos historically gave the example one day where he went into a rental property and saw that the tenants had nailed their Christmas tree to the floor because they were too lazy to buy a stand. And he pointed that out to whoever he was standing next to and said, that right there is why ownership is important. Meaning that, an owner would never do that. An owner would think long-term about the impact they're having to that home. And I think that's so, that is very core to Amazon's philosophy, and the way that Amazon's culture is stood up around this idea of ownership. And if you have people in these important roles running these important businesses, you feel like they're just a cog in the wheel, and they aren't the one who really owns the decision, owns the success of that business or of that program long term, the decisions they make aren't going to be as strong, aren't going to be as lasting and enduring for customers. And so the way that Amazon kind of has put this into practice organizationally is with this idea of separable single-threaded teams, meaning that each project or each program within Amazon needs to have an owner. And that owner shouldn't be, well, these 3 people are working on it. That owner should be a name. Like if I can't say, hey, Yanni owns this, then if I'm not able to answer that question, if it comes up, then there's a problem in Amazon. So first and foremost, there needs to be a single threaded owner, and that owner needs to have that decision right over key decisions in their business, certainly day-to-day decisions in the business, right? Like there can't be a board that reviews everything that goes on. That person needs to have the autonomy and the empowerment to, be responsible and accountable, but also be able to make the decisions. And then this idea of separable is really key because, you can't expect somebody to really give a program or a business everything they've got and really think about it all day and all night and stay up thinking about its long-term success if it's one of 10 things on their plate. And so the idea of this separable single-threaded ownership is that, if Amazon's going to launch a pharmacy business or a devices business, or even launch a new category within a new geography like Turkey or Israel, that category needs to have a single threaded owner that just does that. They're not also managing 4 other categories, or they're not also managing, FBA operations or something else. They need to be able to focus 100% or at least 90% of their time on that problem, or that problem is not going to get the attention that it needs to be as successful as it could be.
So thanks for taking the time to explaining that out to me. I'm sitting here thinking, wow, things that I would consider changing now in terms of, some areas you don't always get it right all the time. And I feel like, we run on EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system. For those of you who don't know, Traction, a book written by Gino Wickman. It's called Getting a Grip on Your Business. Traction talks a lot about accountability and responsibility and how you can delegate effectively to have finite management around specific functions, but to take it to that level of having someone who can focus to that degree and has the accountability to be able to be empowered to make those decisions. I mean, you're sitting here, we're both sitting here right now running and growing businesses, and we probably have, you definitely, I also feel like too, I don't have enough people to solve all the problems that I'm trying to solve today. And, before you know it, there's the next problem that's cropped up. And so you have to deviate and jump back into it. Something happens inside of the recruitment function, and then our marketing's off. And then after the marketing's off, there's always something for anyone who's going through that journey. There's always something that's going to crop up. And so having that ability to have someone entirely accountable, you're just going to sleep that much better at night knowing that this is my domain, this is what I have to do, and everything outside of that plus minus 10% here is not me. Having that level of focus enables true growth and true scale because I'm going to use one of my dad's sayings. This is how old I feel like I'm getting, but one of his favorite sayings is a jack of all trades, a master of none. And so this really enables you to have that level of degree and focus to grow something like Amazon and the specific verticals and the different marketplaces and pieces of technology that happen. There's also a ton of other things that I've loved on it, and things that we're starting to really, it's almost like when I listen to Think Like Amazon and I listen to a lot of the principles that exist inside of the business, it's like we do these things, but without actually naming them. So the other thing that's definitely become top of mind for me is the two-way door versus one-way door decisions in the business. And I'm going to get you to explain it again because I don't want to butcher it. And then we can move on to other topics because I know you're not just a guy who can recite some of the things that happened inside of, the podcast that you've done right now. But I just find it so fascinating that it's that level of not only the understanding and the cohesion across the entire business. So everyone's driving in the same direction. It's like, I don't even know how to place it, but when I listen to when I listen to everyone that you're interviewing on the podcast, it's like you're all speaking the exact same vernacular, like without even knowing it. I've spoken to actually your co-founder at the lab, and not just you guys, but when I spoke to, it might have even been James Thompson. I have to ask, mental map. That's got to be a term used, right?
Yeah, mental map. I would say mental models is
Mental
probably
models.
used even more
Sorry,
at Amazon.
that's it.
But exactly this idea of how do we think about things. So there's definitely a level of it's not just the decision that we're making, but how are we making the decision, the context for that decision. And I think that's exactly where this concept of day one way versus two way doors comes up. And it's interesting that you mentioned that from the podcast, Yanni, because it's not a leadership principle at Amazon, but it's a concept that's talked about a lot. And it's been interesting because it's come up in 3 or 4 different episodes where we're talking about different leadership principles, just because it's something that is considered so often at Amazon that it's part of that vernacular. It's part of that way of thinking about a decision that so many folks at Amazon have become accustomed to. So it's a mental model. And happy to go into talk a little bit more about it if you want.
I mean, I'm not going to pass that opportunity up, am I? Please.
Yeah. So for your listeners or those that haven't heard it before, really, I think what's important in the way that a lot of decisions, you hear about these business narrative documents and Amazon, you have a key decision and everyone sits down and they read a document in silence and then they talk about it. It's all about, okay, we're going to align on the right decision to move forward. Well, what's interesting is that when those decisions kick off, it usually doesn't go straight to, okay, what's the right decision? It usually starts with the leader or some senior people in the room helping guide the thinking around, okay, how are we thinking about this decision? What kind of decision is this? And what are we really trying to get to? Like what, beyond just the decision, what is the kind of meta decision here? How are we approaching serving customers through this business decision? And one of the concepts that often comes up is this idea of identifying a decision as either a one-way door or a two-way door. A one-way door being a decision that is really, really hard to back away from. So something that requires a really large and capital investment that you're not going to get back, or really, if you promise to customers that you are going to deliver all packages within 1 day, like that is a one-way door decision. You can't just say 3 months later, oh, sorry, we were too aggressive in our thinking. We're gonna go back to two-day delivery. That's much easier for us to fulfill. Customers are not going to be happy, and you're going to lose some of that trust. And so there are examples like that are one-way door decisions that when you identify a decision as one-way door, you need to be very rigorous in making sure that you can deliver on that decision. And that requires a lot more robust analysis, considering a lot more options, going over the data, making sure that you've talked to the customers, you know what is operationally required and technically required to really deliver and fulfill that promise that's being made. Now, contrast that with a two-way door decision, which, as the name implies, is a decision that you can reverse if you need to. And while rarely is a decision kind of easy to back away from or has no costs involved, usually these are decisions where the downside is mitigated in some way. So an example might be, hey, we are going to run Prime Day in October instead of the summer, like we saw last year.
Yep.
That's a good example of a two-way door decision. Are there, lost sales or downsides to getting that wrong and misguessing what customers are going to value? Yeah, there are. But at the end of the day, if customer feedback comes in that, hey, Prime Day is much more special if it's in the middle of summer, well, guess what? 2021, you can go back to having Prime Day in the summer.
Yeah, and just such fascinating insights into what it takes to to the decision making process that goes into making big decisions, whether you bet the house on it or whether you take steps into it. And you can always probably take that, like I was saying before, when I'm looking at it, these are all the decisions that, most entrepreneurs in running their businesses are making every day, right? Like, we're always looking at how do we continue to iterate and evolve, from our staffing business. We always go back and forth. Like, we see such value in our ongoing account management and the performance management and how we help educate people on how to create professional run teams, building the onboarding and everything that's related to that. And then we have people who have larger businesses and like, well, we've got an HR function. We really love the fact that this is how we run our processes and we're super established and we don't really need that. So do we just handle the executive search only? Do we enable both? So, you know, we might not overtly promote something, but we'll do it, as a trial run. Does this work for us? And then if we do, then maybe we sort of expand it out. So I think that it's a really handy tool to, to earmark and to actually say, this is, when you put a phrase or a terminology against it, and then that becomes the colloquial term inside of your business, then everyone starts to evolve and think like that. And people become leaders inadvertently, making good decisions inside of their, single-threaded mindset of whatever it is that they're supposed to deliver on in terms of their responsibility and accountability inside of the business. So fascinating stuff. I gotta ask, because you just so casually brushed over it at the start. I'm sitting here, we've got, I don't know, 70, 80 clients, something to that effect today. And you just casually said, well, when we're dealing with hundreds, I think it was hundreds of thousands of sellers. I mean, I can't even grasp what that would look like to consider, like, how would I do this at 100,000, hundreds of thousands of businesses supporting what we're delivering? Like, what does it look like for you sitting in that position, trying to think of it at that scale? Like, what are the stages or the steps that you take to work backwards and say, right, this is how we get it done? Because it's, I think for a lot of people listening, that's like, it's nauseating.
Yeah. And it's not easy, right? Like, I won't pretend that it was ever a walk in the park, waking up one day in Amazon, knowing that I had a $1 billion P&L and the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of sellers in my categories. And, if I made the wrong decision or my team makes the wrong decision, we could be impacting not one person, but hundreds or thousands of people, hopefully positively, but potentially negatively. And so it is something not to take lightly. I think what Amazon does well, and the way that I would manage this at Amazon is really approaching it at a macro level and at a very personal micro level at the same time, and trying to always have that balance. And the way that we would do that is, it's no secret that Amazon has tons of data. Obviously Amazon has shared a subset of that data through Seller Central and Vendor Central, but needless to say, Amazon has a lot of data that it collects on its category business, on sales, and obviously tied at the seller level. And so Amazon can, on a broad stroke level, create kind of these personas and understand how different cohorts of sellers are performing. That might be looking at, Asia based versus US based versus European based sellers, and how the growth is comparing. It might be looking at different size bands, so how much revenue, large sellers versus small sellers. It can also be looking at FBA versus manufacturer fulfilled. It could be looking at different product categories, different size bands. So like ASP or average sales price, low value product sales versus high ticket sales. So a lot of different ways that we would look at the business. So we would look at, okay, at a macro level on a weekly basis, let us look at how the new seller business, the existing and mature sellers are doing across these different segments or personas, and see where there's really high growth and where there's stagnant growth, or where we're running into issues. And from starting at that high level, you can then quickly drill down anytime there's a trend to understand, okay, what's driving that trend, either positive or negative, and what's the learning that we could potentially scale to the other cohorts or the other categories. And so that's one way that I think Amazon starts at a macro level. But I think that just doing that, it's so easy with a business at that scale to miss important signals. And it's so easy to cater to the majority at the expense of the minority. Right. And so the other thing that was super critical, and that I think we really tried to do at Amazon was involving customer, and in this case, customer also meant seller anecdotes as much as we could. And so in these reviews every week, where we would go through it, start at a top level and look at all these key metrics of the business and sales trends, we would also pull in different anecdotes. We would look at, what customer complaints are we seeing? How many sellers got their account suspended this week? And what are the commonalities across some of those suspensions? We might look at, what are customers sharing in their survey feedback through Seller Central, or, just looking at, we would even hold roundtable discussions where we would bring sellers on board and have more casual conversations like this, where we would talk to them about their businesses. And I think that those anecdotes are so key, because more often than not, we would have one of those reviews, and the most valuable learning, the most valuable, like, hey, there's a problem, and we were able to triage and figure out a plan of action to remedy it. Or like, hey, here's a good success story, often came from the anecdotes, not from the macro data. And so I think that having both is key. You need to scale and you need to look at the overall picture, but you have to stay connected to your customer.
I think that gives such great perspective as to how you need to look at such a large business, because I definitely want to dive into the whole data side of things, because I feel like, getting that insight and looking at how you structure the business to pull in the right information to make better decisions, it will serve a lot of people if they approach in the right direction. But to look at the personal level and the macro level, and really doing that level of due diligence is probably one of the many things that sets Amazon apart. And I was talking, like I was saying to you before, with James Thompson, and he was talking about, he's also ex-Amazon. If you haven't listened to that episode, seriously amazing insights, and just I was blown away like I am today. I'm loving every minute of this, if you're not seeing the smiles on my face here. But when you look at effectively the level of data and the insights from working with such a robust data set, right? I mean, it's you're not going to find that much data almost anywhere else in the world, realistically, with the level of people that you touch and the different levels of insights. But how do you, if at all, do you take that into the construction of now, the entry into the lab and what that looks like? Are you from the forefront stepping in and saying, right, this is the information that I'm going to need to get, I'm building the personas, I'm actually tracking the metrics, like, what does that look like for you now, having seen what it looks like at such a scale?
Yeah. And I just have to say, for listeners, like, this was not a seeded question. But I think that what you're asking, Yanni, is exactly what we feel very good about our approach at the lab, and what I think sets us apart a bit. When we were setting off to start working with brands in this space, one of the gaps that we noticed is, there are so many agencies and consultancies out there that do a fantastic job helping block and tackle and grow brands. And, on your podcast and many others, there are a lot of those good practices and tips are shared in the community. I think that's one of the big highlights of this third-party seller space, is you can learn so much from the community. That said, one of the things that we felt we could add in this space was this opportunity to really understand and implement Amazon's operating structure within a business. So within a brand's direct to consumer or Amazon or marketplace business. And so one of the things that we do with many of our clients today is we replicate this weekly business review that we ran with our teams and the marketplace business at Amazon. And we found that, over our time at Amazon, there are really valuable insights that you get from looking at this macro level, having the right KPIs, having the right benchmarks, and really looking at it and drilling into the insights of the business on a weekly basis, and also marrying that with anecdotes that you're collecting in a systematic way. And the process or the playbook that we use over tens of thousands of brands at Amazon, I think is so relevant even when you're working with a single brand. And so that's one of the things that we do and we take over. And then the other thing that I think goes hand in hand with that is just this perspective of thinking like Amazon. Again, not necessarily meaning to tie in the podcast, but really understanding how Amazon operates. If you're on Amazon and you're selling on Amazon, you're doing yourself a disservice to not think about things from the other side of the table and think about, well, how is a category manager or a category leader going to think about what I am contributing to the Amazon business and to Amazon's customers? And so, in our experience, we find that a lot of things from account suspensions to kind of missed growth opportunities really come from a not understanding the signals and the warning signs from the lens of what Amazon is probably thinking or what Amazon systems are likely detecting about your selling patterns. And a lot of times, if you just take the time to look at things through Amazon's perspective or Amazon's lens, you can proactively get ahead of that. And I think that can, pay dividends for a brand as they grow.
Yeah, I'm sitting here and I'm also just thinking back. I sat down with an incredible entrepreneur by the name of Mac Lackey, also earlier this week. He's had 6 exits, is an angel investor in over 75 companies, has sat on the buy side of a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar company, and he's got a course called Exit DNA. And in it, he talks a lot about how do you create value. And a big part of it is looking at your business from the lens of a prospective buyer. And so I think it's a similar sort of methodology or consideration to look at it from the eyes of, if I'm going to make these changes inside of my listing or inside of what I'm doing inside of my business, how might the system approach it? How might the implications actually take part and take hold? And what's the higher level outcome, rather than just looking at the blocking and tackling on the level of, right, I know that this keyword, for example, is a great keyword. There's lots of people going after it, but I feel like I could win out on that. That's like the very tactical level. It's what's that implication going to be to my inventory management, my future marketing, my brand positioning, and my image listings, and how does that actually change the perceived value of the product that I'm looking to sell, on a marketplace like Amazon, for example. So having that higher level, working backwards, thinking at that level and that sort of consideration is becoming a real common trend for things, at least that I feel that I'm learning through my journey of perpetual discovery and just intrigue into how do people think differently? How do people look at the world who have been there and achieved much, much greater things than I have and have done, some really big things. And definitely a constant thing that's coming up. So yeah, I'm trying to absorb all of the knowledge here.
Yeah. If I could maybe add like one example or piece of advice that I think is really helpful. It's, when you're dealing with Amazon, which I think all of us do, and I will be the first to admit that Amazon can be frustrating to work with. Like, even having drunk the Kool-Aid there for 7 years, like I know, and I knew even then, that Amazon is very far from perfect. And so when you're dealing with Amazon, think about it similar to how you would work within your own business and your team. Like, as an employee, you don't want to bring problems to your manager. You want to bring solutions to your manager, right? Like that's common career advice that a lot of us get. And it goes the same way with Amazon. It's really easy. And I think a lot of us do kind of voice our problems or voice our complaints about something that's not working right with Amazon. And the reality is that oftentimes that doesn't get you very far. But if you have if you have somebody listening within Amazon and you can propose a solution, it's surprising how fast those get bubbled up. I mean, I saw solutions get bubbled up to me really quickly from folks on my team at Amazon. I think, one maybe more tangible example of this is with, a suspension where you're submitting a plan of action, right? Like, anyone that's had their account suspended or gotten a warning has submitted a POA on Amazon. And I think, most listeners probably know at this point that just denying that there's a problem or saying that it's Amazon's fault, not your fault, usually doesn't get you very far. in that plan of action, you need to be talking in terms of solutions, in terms of, okay, here's what the problem was, here's how I've addressed it, and here's how Amazon, I'm going to be an easier seller to work with going forward for you. And I think that goes, for anything in dealing with Amazon. If there's something that's not working, rather than, just saying, hey, this isn't working, if you can find someone to listen to your proposed solution, Amazon, going back to innovation, like they're looking for ideas from everywhere, and that includes sellers. So to give you an example of that, on the Amazon Canada team, at one point, we held a roundtable with a group of sellers in Quebec, and they really opened our eyes to how much of Amazon's Seller University and Seller Central resources were not translated into French, which is the primary language in Quebec. And we knew that was an opportunity. We had no idea how widespread or how deep that opportunity ran until we talked to sellers. And from there, we quickly prioritized and invested in adding Quebec or adding French content. I could promise you, like, there had to be seller forums somewhere where sellers were already complaining about this, but it wasn't until somebody said, hey, I think if you translated these videos over here into French, that would help me, because I use those videos when I set up my new listings. And if I didn't know English, like, I would have been stuck and I would have just given up and gone, to eBay or someplace else. So I just go into that example as just one case of, if you can think in terms of solutions, in terms of instead of problems, I think that's just one way of seeing things from Amazon's point of view that will get you really far in the space.
Yeah, I mean, I just had a flashback here. So I know we've chatted, but I was a former Amazon seller myself, and it was December 17, 2018. We did 5 million that year in revenue, and we were a heavy Q4 business, like to a disproportionate degree. We're talking probably 70% of our sales happened in that lead up to Christmas. And I realized I seriously wanted to frame my POA. That's how good it was. I'm going to tell you now, I managed to get our listing that was suspended on December 17 up live within 4 hours of when we were kicked out. And I don't know many people that have had such success in it, but it makes me realize that I took the right actions there. We actually got a call from Amazon. Shocking, it was about review manipulation. One of the people that I worked with it was messy, let's put it that way. And so as a result, we're selling literally tens of thousands, if not, 20, 30, 40, 50. I don't even know how many thousand products a day. No, it was probably tens of thousands, probably 10,000 a day, something like that. I'm exaggerating here. But anyway, the point is, we're doing hundreds of thousands of dollars a day in revenue, and something happened. Something tripped the system, review manipulation. Had no idea. I wasn't involved in it. I had no idea what the cause was. And I sat down with him and I said, listen, you're going to tell me every possible thing that could possibly have happened to create this issue. And I literally listed, like, this is the issue. This is how we've addressed it. This is what it's caused. And I built a very formulaic approach on how to, what perceivably might have happened, what created that issue, and how we're going to mitigate that from ever happening again in the future. Managed to get on a phone call and we got back online. It was a miracle when you think of the size of Amazon and who you need to actually speak to. And, I think we got very lucky, but I think that that's a life lesson for me, definitely. And for everyone, is that if you come with the solutions and you really do the work for someone else, because what's the other option, right? If you don't do that work, then someone else has to figure it out, and then that's their problem. And, why do they care? How do you help make people's lives easier so that you can effectively make their life easier, and therefore they can actually get it done, what needs to be done. So, I didn't think about it that way at the time, but I mean, it makes a lot of sense now in hindsight, and hearing you sort of outline why things might move quickly at the end of the day. And I think the one thing people forget is that it's people doing business with people. It doesn't matter if it's Amazon or Sony or MasterCard or whoever the company is. At the end of the day, there is going to be a human at least today, but there's going to be a human at the other end reading what you're putting, on paper or on your email. So be cognizant of that and make sure that it's in a way that's very easily digestible and something that can actually help them progress them into where they need to be, for sure.
Yeah. And kudos to you. 4 hours to get something turned around is, not many people do that on Amazon. So that, I think, speaks to how effective your approach was. And, I would say for anyone listening today or in the future that finds themselves with a suspension, go back and listen to the last 2 minutes of what Yanni shared, because he high level walked through his approach to how he put that plan of action together, which is so key. And I think the other thing that's kind of been implied as we've talked about this is that the human you're working with on the Amazon side, they're probably very bandwidth constrained. And so as easy and simple you can make things, the more likely you are to get them to take action. Like if you can make something be a 2-minute decision instead of a 2-hour decision, like you're much more likely to not get put on a back burner somewhere. And it sounds like that's exactly what you did with your POA approach.
Yeah. Wow. We did $900,000 in the next 6 days or 7 days on the back of that. And that was that was nearly the entire profit for the year. So that would have sent us back to square one, stuck with inventory until the end of next year. So, yeah, now that I realize I was a hero. But that's part of the journey, right? And that's what a lot of Amazon sellers and everyone's dealing in different varying degrees inside of the businesses, is that, when you take that accountability, to draw on the single threaded leadership, taking ownership, not letting someone else sort of, handle that situation when in that moment of time. And, typically you're going to get the result that you're after, because I'm not a believer really in luck. I feel like you make your own luck. And so in moments like that, it's how can I think through 5 steps ahead what that person is going to be dealing with, and how do I solve every possible perceivable question. I actually, in that company that I helped scale from 2 to 5 million, I did a presentation that was entitled "The Briefing Process," and the whole presentation was simply put like, when I'm thinking about a creative brief or I'm putting anything in, my single objective is how do I put every piece of information that I could possibly think about so that not one person bothers me until it's done. Just leave me alone. So, that was how I almost created that. I wanted to say laziness, but it's not laziness. It creates effectivity. But, if you take that approach in building businesses, responding to Amazon, whatever it is, how do you help first? How do you make someone else's life easy so that you're not stuck sort of picking up the pieces and going back and forth?
Yeah, it's in Yanni, listening to you, like I'm putting the picture together now. You are somebody that clearly thinks about how do I make things easy for others without me needing to explain it to them, by documenting well, by organizing well, by structuring, by keeping that focus on, okay, what is the solution? What does somebody need to do with this information? Not just put the information on paper. And all of this clearly leads into this Escala business that you've built and what you're doing for clients. And so it's kind of fun to see the way your mind works a little bit and how that's helped you be successful in this business you've built.
Yeah, well, thanks for the compliments. And it's I think that for everyone it's beyond possible. And I don't look at myself as anyone particularly special. I just think that, if you take that approach of how do you help first, how do you really put yourself in the shoes of your clients, of, if you're in Amazon, if you're the sellers, the customers, your co-workers, the employees that you have, how do you uniquely put yourself in their position? You then work backwards and say, right, well, that's how I help them. That's how I help them. That's how I help them. And that's how I think a lot of innovation comes throughout any business and any individual. That's how you evolve, is just to try and think that next few steps ahead and solve the problems that haven't even sort of come to light yet.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
So on that note, Tyler, I've got to say, mate, I have enjoyed this so much. I'm not joking here. I'm definitely going to have you back on, because this is way too much fun, and I've learned so much in 40, 50 minutes here. It's just so valuable to me. And, there's no way people listening at home aren't seeing the same level of value that I'm getting out of this. So I just want to say, firstly, thank you so much for taking the time out. And before I let you go, I'd love you to share just a little bit about the lab, who you're looking to help. We can plug Think Like Amazon all we want. You're clearly seeing the value that I'm getting out of it. And as someone who's sitting and talking to people and creating a podcast of my own, this is the podcast or one of them that I'm going to learn myself. So, worthwhile listen. But over to you.
Yeah, at the lab, we help brands, and particularly we love to help brands that have a real mission or a purpose or some differentiated value. It's just very satisfying to help you then scale that. And we feel like that's one of the things that we can do is, again, as I said before, we bring this ability to operate like Amazon to the way that you are scaling your business on Amazon and in e-commerce. And so if that's something that resonates with what anybody maybe listening is looking to do or looking to accomplish, please reach out. We're at thelabconsult.com. Feel free to reach out to me at tyler@thelabconsult.com. I'm happy to share my direct email. And then, if you're just looking to maybe understand a little bit more about Amazon and hear from, much more than me, but many other former Amazon leaders that have kind of learned these principles and learned kind of what Amazon does best, and in many cases gone on and applied that to leading or building or growing a business outside of Amazon subsequently, tune in to Think Like Amazon. I think, it's a good complement to the content that you're providing here, Yanni, in terms of how business owners and entrepreneurs can really scale their business and grow something that can be lasting.
Again, mate, thank you so much. Loved it. And, I hope everyone reaches out, who's looking to build a brand on Amazon. And, you're getting really access to someone who understands on the business side what's going on. So, unfair advantage, but, you use those advantages. So again, thank you so much. And mate, it's been absolutely a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks, Yanni.